Okay.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We are here. We are very glad to be here with Ian Gibbins. He's an Australian director, which we were honored to have last year with a film, and for this year he is presenting other 2 films to our festivals. So today we will talk a bit about these 2 films and ask him some questions. We are really very glad to have him here because he's a very prolific director and very creative, and his films are mostly video poems. So this year we have actually 2 video poems from him. The first is called After Image, and we can start from this maybe. After Image is a video poem, and in the description of his film he writes that after image is the residual image that you see if you look away at a blank wall or something similar, having stared at a brightly lit scene. So the after image is a negative of the original in terms of light, dark, and color. And it is mostly due to photoreceptors in the retina becoming desensitized by the original scene. It fades after a few seconds as the receptors reset. So our land, our buildings, our travels, our past, perhaps they all live after images, he writes. Perhaps they all contain after images of those who precede us. This film was for us very interesting, and of course in this description we can also see your scientific roots somehow, and this is very interesting how you mix your knowledge, scientific knowledge, with poetry, because there is really a poetry behind this physical phenomenon. And you, as we saw also in your last year, you can really you seem to be very able to find this connection between your scientific knowledge and the poetry that lies behind. And this film was for us this kind of film. So in this film we can hear a lot the word them is always repeated, and is addressing to these figures like shadows that appears in this place. So my first question is, when you wrote the monologue for this film, did you have a clear idea of who were them for you? Because of course everyone then can a bit interpret, and it's very interesting that you leave everything open. But what brought you to address this them in this direct way, and in this way? Who were them for you?
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be part of the festival again this year, and to have 2 film series is wonderful. So I really appreciate the opportunity, and especially now to talk about it a little bit. So who are the them? Who are they? It's a good question, and it is ambiguous, and it's ambiguous on purpose because where we live here in Australia, in South Australia, where I am now, there's a big ongoing historical problem, and that is when the British colonists came here over 200 years ago, they declared that it was terra nullius, the land with no people, the land that didn't exist, and they took it for themselves. And then I'm the descendant of those people in lots of ways. But there have been Aboriginal people here for 40,000 years, and it's their land. And it's never been granted to the Europeans, to the colonists, by any sort of treaty or anything else. So we say we live on here, and where I live is unceded Kaurna land. It's unceded land of the Kaurna people. They've never formally given it up. So everywhere you go, there is this history. It's the longest continuous history of people, of a culture, of a society anywhere on earth, and it's been largely ignored. But they must be everywhere. So there are certainly the people are still here, but the names of places are still here, and their life, their own version of what how they live their lives, how it fits in with the world and their worldviews is a very deep and spiritual thing, which we don't have access to very much. So that's part of it. But the other part of it's more recent too. And nearly all of the footage for After Image was taken just because I happened to be in the place. It wasn't specifically for this film initially. It was mostly taken with my phone. And it was, I was doing a part of an art installation in an old factory in the port of Adelaide. And this building had barely been used for nearly 100 years, and we had access to it. So a lot of the interior shots, I just was walking around while we were cleaning up, taking pictures with my phone, and I realised there were shadows coming in through the window, and I just filmed those. And then entirely by coincidence, I was in a couple of other places and I thought, oh, there's shadows there, like in a pub where we were having dinner one night and then waiting for a train. And then once I started to gather that, I started thinking, oh, hang on, this is coming together. There's something going on here. And so I went out a few more times still with my phone. Nearly everything on that was with my phone. And then I took a few other sequences just here out there and out in the garden at night with my camera, which has an infrared detector on it, so I could film with infrared to see at night. So another group of them is the people who used to live and used to work in these old buildings, and it's a flour mill, making flour for bread. So it's them as well. But as you go through the poem, exactly who's speaking seems to change. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the them might be me and my people being spoken to by the ghosts or the spirits or the predecessors out there in the mill, out there in the countryside, out there that people have been here for thousands of years talking to me as them. So it shifts, it goes backwards and forwards in an ambiguous way. And what I'm most interested in writing and in video is exploring these ambiguities of voice and ambiguities of language.
That's interesting. Yeah, and actually you somehow answered also to my second question that I had in mind, because my second question was related exactly to who is speaking, because it's true that the voice as well as the them is ambiguous. Also the voice speaking is ambiguous, and this, I think it's really helping to create this suspended atmosphere somehow, where everything is possible, every interpretation is possible, and your interpretation changes throughout the film. So yeah, and I thank you also because I noticed this also last year, like you are also very generous in describing your working process, and this is interesting for us because we are very much interested in what's the creative process that the director uses. And in your case, it seems that really it's like you are taking pieces from many things and then you find a composition that is not pre-decided. This is very interesting. So yeah, and actually maybe I would already pass to the second film, because yeah, you already answered somehow to some of the questions that I had about this film, and then we come to the two of them. Yeah, your second film is another video poem. It's called The Life We Live Is Not Life Itself, and is realized together with a poet, Tassos Sagais, Greek poet. In this film, you say that Tassos Sagais' poem, with its haunting soundtrack by Who Does, I hope the pronunciation is good, offers us an extended exploration of lives lived in parallel, at cross purposes, in and out love, around the world, from the innocence of children to the wisdom of elders. And then you ask, in your description, you ask some question, but what is reality? What is mere illusion? And can there be more to life than simply living? And yeah, nothing in the video is quite as it seems. So also in this video, I feel a lot of ambiguity and a lot of suspension, and the film is very much open to interpretations. This is something that is also that is common to these two films. And yeah, so my first question about this film, I was curious to know, how did you work with the poet? Because in this case, it was not you who wrote the monologue, but it was a poem by someone else. So how was your collaboration? How did it work?
Yeah, that was a very interesting process for me. People normally think of poets, always working by themselves, and which is true, I suppose. But as a scientist, we worked collaboratively all the time. When I had 10 people in my lab and we had collaborators all around the world. So I'm used to working with people. As much as I like doing everything myself, it's also good working with other people. So this project came about after I met Tarzos at the Poetry Video Festival in Athens in 2019. And essentially the video was a commission from the Institute for Experimental Arts in Athens, and they were funded to create a series of videos about Greek poetry, mostly contemporary Greek poets, but also just modern poets. And they commissioned a group of people to do that. And so I did this one with Tarzos as a contemporary poet, and also as a friend. It was good too. And so he sent me a couple of texts, and we talked about them a bit, and we ended up choosing this one, mostly because we didn't have very much time initially. We only had a couple of months to get it done for the first deadline. And the other texts, I couldn't easily see how I was going to get material together to suit those texts. So we chose this one because straight off, I sort of had an idea on how we might be able to do it. I like the idea of the travel that pervades the poem, and also the way it sort of shifts backwards and forwards in time, a bit like the other one. So for this one, having got the text, I actually did something I don't always do. I went out very specifically. I made a list of ideas for scenes and went about around town, around the coast, to specifically film things that I thought, this would be good. We might be able to use this. We might be able to use that. So I ended up taking hours and hours and hours of footage, which we only used a small amount. And then I put together a draft of it and sent it to Tarzos, and he didn't like it because he said, it needs people in it. We've got to have people. All my poems are about people. And I said, well, I don't do people. I don't have actors. I don't have access to actors. And in the time that was available, it wasn't possible to try and recruit somebody and work out the script and direct it and everything. So then I had this idea that, well, you can get access to artificial people these days. You can get access to artificial intelligence generated faces. And I knew about that from some of the work I had when I was teaching neuroscience and anatomy, and I knew that work was out there. So I found a company which has a library of something like 1.5 million faces which are generated by artificial intelligence, but taken from real photos of real models who are commissioned to come in and be photographed for the series. So and it's an incredible resource. So you can pick the person based on age, on ethnicity, how much hair they've got, what the colour of the hair is, and then you pick, say, 3 of those, and then you pick 20 more like that, and then 20 more like that. So I made a library of these faces, and then I animated them. So they merge, if you look carefully, like they merge from one into another, goes young to old, or male to female, or dark skin to light skin, or something like that. And that took ages. So that was almost frame by frame animation to merge from one face to the next. So that was that. Then the other thing, I don't remember how I came up with the idea now. But the other thing, which if you look at most of those scenes where there are people in them, if you look carefully, the same people appear twice in the same scene. So you see someone walking side by side, and it's actually the same person. Or you see someone walk past, and then they're followed by a couple of seconds later by the same person walking down the street. And they're all just taken it completely almost at random out of the footage that I had when I realised, oh, there's people here. And so then I had to work out a way of animating and compositing the second figure as they move. So one goes across the screen, then the other one comes across. So I had to have the background had to be fixed, and then the lighting had to be right, so I could manually outline and cut out the second figure and then have it move and time it and everything properly, and get all the shadows to match up and everything like that. So in that video, and it's actually true for the other ones, true for After Image as well, just about every single scene is artificial. Almost none of those scenes actually exist in real life. So even the ones which look like a city street or a park or inside a building, one wall might be from one location, the other wall might be from a different location, and even the sky and the seas are nearly all made from multiple layers. So many of the scenes in both those videos are composited from as many as 20 or 30 individual elements. So Tarzos he didn't know what I was doing with all of this, and so I made some samples and sent them to him, and he liked them, and so that gave us a good theme to go work through. But then, even so, as I was putting it together, he'd say that scene at 6 minutes 30, I hate it. It's terrible. It's no good. And I say, why? And he said, oh, it looks like some bourgeois car driving through. We don't want bourgeois cars driving through the scene. Okay, fine. So we dropped the scene. Or he didn't like the way some of the people were moving, or we couldn't see the relevance of it. And then some of the scenes he really liked, we ended up cutting out too. So, but that's the way it goes. That's the way you make stuff. You make much more than you need, and then you throw most of it out. So
yeah. That's very interesting. I mean, both, yeah, your dialogue with the poets, like it seems that you were really in dialogue about, and that his suggestions were leading you, but in the same time you were proposing. This is very interesting to know how the collaboration works. But then also what you said about, about this artificial intelligence faces and about repeating the same person in the same scene. It's very interesting, I feel, because it's something that I feel is very present in your, maybe I'm wrong, but I had the impression that it's very present in your works, this idea of taking elements from the reality, but then creating this kind of displacement, like this impossibilities that are just slightly perceptible. So are not like creating completely otherworldly landscapes, but in the same time you always have this feeling of that you are in the real world, but you are not in the same time. And this is very interesting. Like I feel, it's really, I mean, especially for the themes that these two films addresses, is really, it's really powerful, because it creates this exact sensation. At least for me, it was really this. And I didn't know anything about the fact that you chose faces that were not existing somehow, in real life, like those faces are of people, unexistent people, but it's interesting to know this background aspect, because it makes you reflect a lot on what is identity in the end, and that's what the film is about. So
yeah, I'm really pleased you react that way, because that's what I was hoping to do, and that's with at least some of these videos that I make. And people used to ask me when I started, going into more art and things like that, was how the science interacts with my art and creative process. And it does in all sorts of ways. But one of the things, I suppose the underlying theme, which I used to address primarily in my poetry, but then now it's moving into the video as well, is one of the things that modern neuroscience tells us is that most of what we experience is assembled out of fragments. It doesn't mean our experiences aren't real and they don't reflect the external world, but they're very fragmentary. And so a very simple example, as we're sitting here talking, I'm looking at you on the screen, and until I think about it, I don't actually know what's happening out the window out there. But nevertheless, there's light coming from the window, there's a tree there, and there's a chair out there, and it's getting dark out there. If I start looking at there, now I can't concentrate on you. So that's a very simple example. But there's another layer down just below the conscious experience of what we do. And if most people experience it just before you go to sleep. You go through a phase when just random thoughts just flick through your little ideas, little images, flick, 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 flick. You go from one thing to the other. And in fact, even just as I'm talking to you now, I'm thinking what I'm going to say next. There's all these other bits going everywhere. And so one of the incredible things your brain does is to keep attention on what you want to do in the face of a completely overwhelming input of potential sensory experience. So the senses are recording all the time. Your eyes are recording all the stuff all the time, but in little snapshots. Your skin's recording touch all the time. And until I mention it, you don't think about your second toe or your elbow. Now you think about it. Now if I talk about something else, you think about it again. So there's this level of experience which is just sort of subconscious, just on the borderline between conscious and subconscious experience. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that it's almost impossible to describe that, as I'm trying to do now. It's almost impossible. And as good as language is, there's lots and lots of things language completely fails at. So language is great for giving you instructions on a shopping list or something like that. It's great for telling you a story. But if I had to try and explain to you in words how I did that, I couldn't. It'd be almost impossible to describe that in words in a way that you could do it without watching, without looking at me. And so there's these two levels of experience. There's these little fragmentary sensory experiences and little thoughts that flick into your mind all the time that are internally generated. So there's little external flickers coming in, then the internal flickers coming up through your brain, which are almost, the moment you start thinking about it, you lose them because you're in about thinking about what you want to think about. And then the other thing then is the fact that so much of what we experience, you can't actually describe in words in any sensible way. And so you can see out the window there, there's a tree there, and we can easily see, even just on the video, you can see all the different leaves on the tree, and you can easily see they're all different leaves, but you can't describe that. Each individual leaf doesn't have a name. You could try it, but you're going to run out of time pretty soon. So, and even just the furniture behind me, I mean, that's a couch, but the couch maker probably knows what it's called, but I don't, the particular model. So, so language fails on lots of things. So a lot of my poetry is deliberately ambiguous, and it's very internal. So what I'm trying to capture is this internal ambiguity of experience where the language really doesn't work. So in after image, the language is sort of strange. It's not quite proper grammar, and it's not quite normal speech rhythms, and it flicks around. As you say, there's words, them and we keep popping backwards and forwards, and that's something I like doing. So in Tasos' poem, in the Greek one, he came at that from a completely different philosophical point of view. I mean, none of that idea at all. But in fact, the way that he wrote it, it's very ambiguous. It's hard to know who's speaking it. It's hard to know who we're going to meet again. As he says, we will meet again as parents, as children, as lovers, and it's talking about a future. Yet it seems to be embedded in the past and the things which have happened in the past. There are good things and bad things, right, slapped up side by side. There's jail and there's beaches and there's Los Angeles and there's Senegal. So I think that's part of the reason that that video came together so well, because through different starting points we came to the same place, and that was wonderful. I mean, that's fantastic. That's exactly what collaboration is all about. And then we came out into something that none of us would have done ourselves. So I wouldn't have made a video like that if I hadn't have had that poem. And there's no way Tasos, the way he normally works with video, would have come up with something that I did.
Yeah. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I have to say that really, I can see, it's true that I can see a lot of connections between the first poem, who was written by you, and the second one, even though, of course, they are also different. But it's true that there is this common thing of you don't know who is speaking, and you don't know whom is addressing to, and every sentence is somehow living by itself, and you can understand that there is a connection, but it's not so linear. And it's really interesting. What I got is really this sense of displacement, which is not, as I said, it is not bringing you to a totally another world of fantasy, but it's just while you are in the everyday life, you are in the same time you are not, you are on another dimension of perception somehow. So yeah, this is very interesting for me, and I am sure that also the viewers of your film will get this atmosphere, because it's very strong.
And thank you. I mean, the other thing, just briefly about the science there, is that this just slight displacement from reality. Mm-hmm. It's actually very, very easy in real life to do that. So I used to do with my students. There were ways I could show that time stops. You can do that. It's easy to do. We can't do it over Zoom because the frame rate's not high enough. But it's very easy to make it seem as though time stops just for a second. It's easy to make people feel like someone else's body is part of their own. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very famous demonstration. And it's easy to do with most people. You can make someone's speech appear to change just by opening and closing your eyes, by using very, very carefully doctored sounds, constructed sounds. And it's, again, a very famous experiment that was done many, many years ago now. So you open and close your eyes, and what the person appears to be saying changes. Okay. So there's, and the other thing which is very easy, was not an experiment that we used to do, but a very famous experiment, is that it actually takes about a third of a second to half a second for our conscious experience to be felt as now. So what we experience as now actually happened about a third of a second earlier. And again, it's quite easy to demonstrate that with very simple equipment. So all this slight disconnect, that there's a slight shift, is that I'm making in these sorts of videos, it's not very far off what can happen in real life.
Yeah, definitely. And now that you are saying this, I'm thinking again about this second film. Like, it's true that it's something that I felt also in the film of last year that you presented last year, like this idea that inside one landscape or one image that you get, then it's like there are a lot of doors, and inside over this door, behind these doors, there are other worlds, and you can, it's like every image is full of doors, and this is really the perception that you describe, also related to our everyday experience of life. It's true that in the same time that we are now speaking, I can perceive my legs on the chair. I can feel another sound from outside. I can see your tree, the garden, and all these things are part of my present experience. So
yes.
This is also something that in the technique you used is very much how to say is very present, because for the technique that you use, we see a lot of windows, and behind the windows there is something else, but in the same time in the place there is something else happening. Yeah, and this I think the technique you use is very fitting for bringing this kind of feeling.
Yeah, it's interesting about the window is it's partly practical thing for the filmmaking too, because they make a nice frame. It makes it a bit easier to make those layers, and it also gives a viewpoint, a fixed viewpoint. So I suppose another small amount of theory which comes out from what I was saying earlier is that I actually try in my writing and more in the video work is to create a first-person view, a first-person narrative. So it's not so much that in my videos there's some all-seeing, independent, anonymous cameraman somewhere who's filming people doing stuff. No, this is what I'm seeing out of my eyes, and that's what I'm trying to create. In the same way, my poems, nearly all my poems are written in first person, but they're not necessarily me. They're fictitious. They're characters I think of, or groups of people I think of, to tell a particular story or present a particular viewpoint. And I like that when I read a lot of novels and experimental writing and things like that, and I in general prefer novels written in first person, so you feel like you're in someone's head, or even in a third person novel if it's written entirely from one person's viewpoint, so you only ever know about the world through that one person. Then that's what I really like.
Yeah, thank you. That's interesting. Yeah. And yeah, now I'm thinking, I have another question that is a bit going to another direction, and it's just because I was curious. I saw, for what I know of your films so far, I saw that there is a special attention that is given to the soundtrack also. Mm-hmm. And for example, talking about the soundtrack, in this film, there is also a very atmospheric soundtrack that I think works very well in the direction of bringing the viewer to this kind of atmosphere. And this soundtrack was created by who does? I don't know if it's a group or an artist. So my curiosity was, as well as I asked you how you worked with the poet, how you worked with the musician and with the people who composed this soundtrack.
But that was not normally. I do all the soundtracks myself, so I do all my own music and perform it all and everything. And for the life we live, the soundtrack came with it. So Tarzos and who does is mostly one person, but sometimes there's two, and he's a fantastic guitar player, and synthesizer, composer, and he and Tarsos have been working together for a long time. I met him in Athens as well. So the soundtrack came with it in this instance, so the Tarsos had the recording of Tarsos reading the poem with that soundtrack came as a unit pretty much, and then I worked to fit the video to the soundtrack. But that's the way I do it anyway. I nearly always do that regardless of where I start making one of my video, especially the video poems, it usually starts with a pre-existing poem that I've got, and then I think about, oh, this might be good to make a video. What might it look like? And I'll go and start collecting footage, or look through my library and start putting stuff together, or animate something. I might sometimes just do it straight from scratch from animation. And then I do the soundtrack and work out what it should sound like, you know. Is it and I generally like stuff loud. I mean, I don't. Lots of video poems, they have sort of quiet atmospheric tracks. So the one with Who Does is quite unusual for me. I don't normally have those sort of flowing, sort of melodic tracks. I like using lots of sound effects, lots of found sounds, industrial sounds. I just record when I'm walking around the place, animals, lots of voice processing. I quite often will just take samples of my voice and just keep processing and processing and processing. Then they become new sounds in their own right. I sometimes use sound generators for voice to text to voice generators and things like that. So the critical thing then is that having the soundtrack, the rhythm of that then drives the rhythm of the video. It nearly always goes that way. Even if I think of what the video is going to be first, then I always like to get the soundtrack. And to make that easier for people who are interested in music, I use beats per minute rate that are evenly divide into minutes, so 120 beats a minute or 90 beats a minute or 135, because that makes the video editing much easier because you can do it frame perfect, and it makes it easy to keep everything sort of aligned and changing easily. So then I work when I do the final editing. I usually start off with the music, with the soundtrack on the timeline, and I pop the bits of video in it where they go, and I might, leave a gap if I haven't got that bit, and then I'll do frame level, 30 millisecond level edits to get everything lined up right. And so I'm really fussy about that. And quite often when I do the voice recording, which included some edits on what Tarsos did with Who Does, I'll shift them up and down the time a bit to when I know where the video is going. Then we think, oh, it really doesn't work there. We need a different transition. And quite often for my own text in particular, I'll either re-record some of it or drop stuff out or change it or change the order of the text or something like that to make it fit the video as the video comes together. So it starts with the audio, goes to the video, and then I'm quite happy to redo the audio at the end.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting to know how you work.
Yeah.
And actually, I think my last question is just related to what are you, if you are working on something new now, if you have other projects after these films that you are working at the moment.
Yes, I've got a whole range of projects at the moment. Perhaps not surprising. I've done a lot of collaboration this year with artists, and they've taken a lot of time, and they've ended up being videos which have been shown in galleries or in installations. So I've worked with two different visual artists and makers. We had a video installation as part of the Adelaide Arts Festival earlier in the year. We've just finished one recently that was part of a friend's big art exhibition in one of the big city galleries. In fact, it's her picture on the wall behind me there. And I'm also working with a group of people on a theatre production, which is having a video wall behind on the back of the stage. And originally it was going to be huge. It was going to be like a 10 metres across, so 10,000 pixels across. But we're not doing that quite the same way now. But in doing that, I've been working out how to deal with very, very large format videos, and they want everything animated. So everything's got to be built from scratch. So the sorts of things we're talking about right at the start and how I put these scenes together, to do that for effectively 8K or 10K video is just about burning my computer up. And I've had to learn a whole lot of new technical tricks just for the workflow. So I've had to break just about everything I do has got to be broken up into little segments, so that I can do some compositing, then render that, and then composite the next bit. So I really have to plan everything out. And I use 2 computers for doing it, this one and a laptop, which is a bit newer than this one. But even so, when I do it, sometimes I have no idea how long it's going to take to render. Sometimes it will take 10 minutes and sometimes it will take 10 hours, and you never know till you start. So that's taking time. But I'm also working on one of my own video projects, which is working title is Micro Refugia. So it's going back to climate and stuff. And so micro refuges are the tiny little bits of habitat where small creatures and small plants can sometimes survive when everything around them is breaking down. Mm-hmm. So I'm using all the techniques we've been talking about. I'm creating these sort of artificial, not quite real environments within which there are orchids and insects and other unknown native plants, small native plants, which will somehow or other develop a life while everything around them is going bad. And I'm using ruins. Actually, you can see it in the corner there. Yeah, there's a box of pieces there. That's parts of an old inkjet printer, and so as parts out in this microenvironment, parts of mechanical objects and ruins of machines and things evolve and morph underneath plants and in streams and in the background behind flowering orchids and things like that. It's taking me ages and ages. I might be ready for next year. We'll see.
Yeah, we are very curious to watch it once it will be finished. Yeah. Okay, Ian, I think I asked you enough for today. I was really very glad to talk to you again, and also to be able to watch other of your films. We hope we will be able to screen your films even in the next years. You are always welcome to the festival, of course. Once it will be, maybe one time you will be able to come physically, but also always to have chats like this, because it's always very interesting.
Well, thank you very much. It was a wonderful discussion. It's great to talk to you. And Sweden is actually almost my second home. So I've had friends in Sweden since the mid-1970s in Göteborg, and I've been there very many times, and I'd love to come and visit you.
Great. You're
when we're allowed to travel again. Hopefully next year we'll be able to travel again.
And next year probably the festival will be in summer again. It will come back to its original time. So you're always welcome.
Thank you very much.
For the moment, thank you very much for giving us your time now. And of course, for all the viewers who still haven't watched your film after these interviews, they can for sure go and watch them because they are worth it.
But there's so many other fine films as well. I've been watching the last few days and I'll look some more tomorrow. It's a fantastic festival.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And I think it's also interesting to see the interactions between the films inside the section, because of course we try to put them together on a thematical aspects. So yeah, it's like you made a travel journey inside these films. So yeah, have a nice evening. I guess it's evening.
Yes. Getting, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, and
okay.
see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye, Ian. Ciao.
Ciao.